good to see you all again. And for the camera, I'm Paul Kengor, Institute for Faith and Freedom, Grove City College. I'm just going to give a quick welcome, and then Jake Reese is going to introduce Joe Loconte, our first speaker. So you have your programs, right? And looking at the agenda for today, Joe Loconte is going to speak first on Reason, Revelation, and Revolution. I love that title. That's your next book, right there. And then after that, we have Lenny McAllister, Megan Martin of the Commonwealth Foundation. Our president, Brad Lingo, at 11 o'clock is going to speak on the most American college in America. What do you think that is? That's right here, baby. It's right here. And we got the great Michael Medved back at lunch. His film, The American Miracle, had a red carpet premiere at the Kennedy Center last year. I guess it's now the Trump Center, right? So that we got that in before it closed down, right? And then at 2 o'clock to 3, we got Gary Scott Smith back, and he just did a history of Grove City College, and Dr. Jay Cost as well. So they're going to be out speaking on the faith of the founders, James Madison. 3:15, I'm doing the founders and slavery. I think you'll hope you'll enjoy that presentation. Larry Reed, is Larry here? I know Michael Medved. Where's Larry? Larry's not here yet. All right. Got Larry Reed at 4 o'clock. And then at 5:15, I'm really looking forward to the dinner talk. We have Matt Spalding, formerly of the Heritage Foundation, now runs the Hillsdale Center in D.C. In fact, I got to put this out, he's married to Elizabeth Edwards Spalding. Elizabeth Edwards Spalding's father was Lee Edwards, who wrote Freedom's College, about the history of Grove City College. But he just wrote a great book on the making of the Declaration of Independence. So we thought for a conference on the 250th anniversary of 1776, what could be better than that? And then tonight, you got to stick around tonight. We have a really talented student at Grove City College. He's a senior, hasn't graduated yet. Will Hearn, he's a filmmaker, and he came to us with an idea about a year ago to do a film about the American dream. And so we got behind it. He interviewed a bunch of people for it, several of the people that are here today. So he put together this really good documentary film called The Impossible Dream. We wanted to screen it at the Guthrie in town, but the Guthrie, unfortunately, is closed, at least for now. And by the way, the prospects for that are good. I think it's reopening, and it's going to have new ownership, and it should be okay. But that'll be 7:15 at Crawford Auditorium on campus, and we're going to have a literal red carpet for that, and a lot of popcorn. So that'll be this evening. So with that, welcome back, and here's Jacob Reese to introduce Joe Loconte.
Well, good morning, everybody. As Dr. Kengor said, my name is Jacob Reese, and I am a student fellow here at the Institute for Faith and Freedom. This morning, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Joseph Loconte. Dr. Loconte is an author, an educator, and a filmmaker. He's the director of the Rivendell Center in New York City and hosts the YouTube channel History and the Human Story. He also serves as a presidential scholar at New College of Florida and as the C.S. Lewis Scholar for Public Life at Grove City College. Loconte is the author of several books, including the New York Times bestseller A Hobbit, a Wardrobe, and a Great War, How J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis Rediscovered Faith, Friendship, and Heroism in the Cataclysm of 1914 to 1918, and God, Locke, and Liberty, The Struggle for Religious Freedom in the West. His most recent book is The War for Middle-earth. J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis Confront the Gathering Storm, 1933 to 1945. Mr. Loconte's commentary has appeared in both scholarly and popular journals and outlets, including National Affairs, The New Criterion, the New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, National Public Radio, National Geographic, and National Review. A native of Brooklyn, New York, he divides his time between Washington, D.C. and New York City. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Loconte.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me back there in the bleacher seats all right? Terrific. I'm an intellectual historian, which doesn't mean I'm a particularly smart guy. It just means I study the history of ideas. And we're going to run through some ideas here today, particularly John Locke and his impact on the American founding. But how many philosophers do we have in the audience? Just out of curiosity, philosophers. good, because I'm not a philosopher either. I'm not really capable of abstract thought. I am the great-grandson of a baker, the grandson of a barber, and the son of an eggman from Brooklyn. We don't do philosophy in the Loconte family. So we're going to land the plane. You've got a handout here, folks, so just hang on to that. We're not going to sing along with the handout, but we will refer to it with some of these quotations to try to make the point. The ideas that helped produce the American Revolution and why ideas matter. So let's get into it. In the throes of the Revolutionary War, November 1779, Abigail Adams, wife of John Adams, of course, writes to her son, John Quincy. The young man does not want to travel with his father on another diplomatic mission to France. John Quincy would rather get ready for his education there at Harvard. But his mother is a patriot, and she has a different sense of her son's duties at this moment. Here's what she writes to John Quincy. Here's a piece of it. It will be expected of you, my son, that as you are favored with superior advantages under the instructive eye of a tender parent, that your improvements should bear some proportion to your advantages. These are the times in which a genius would wish to live. It is not in the still calm of life that great characters are formed. The habits of a vigorous mind, she says, are formed in contending with difficulties. Great necessities call out great virtues. When a mind animated by scenes that engage the heart, then those qualities which otherwise lay dormant wake into life and form the character of the hero and the statesman. Now, if you got a letter like that from your mother, what would you do? You get in the boat. He got in the boat. Well, these were the kinds of leaders that the American Revolution produced, friends, men and women devoted to the concepts of liberty, equality, of virtue, of sacrifice for a noble cause, the cause of government by consent of the governed, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Well, it's worth pointing out that America has been at war with a nation in the Middle East that is itself at war with all of these fundamental beliefs about how to build a just society, the nation of Iran, right? Officially called, there's the official name of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. The government in Tehran has appropriated the political nomenclature of the West. Iran is not a republic in any sense of the words, friend. Its ideology is that of radical Shia Islam. It is a brutal and murderous theocratic state, a religious dictatorship. It represents fascism with an Islamic face. Iran is committed to the annihilation of the Jewish people and the destruction of the West. It's threatening the peace of the world. Now, these facts make it especially astonishing that politicians such as the Democratic Senator Tim Kaine do not understand what distinguishes the Iranian Revolution from the American Revolution. Here is what the senator said during a Foreign Relations Committee hearing September of 2025. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator, that's what the Iranian government believes, the senator says. So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling. Friends, what is extremely troubling, what staggers the imagination, is that people could hold positions of high political office and remain so woefully and pathetically ignorant of the nature of the American Revolution. And I would say that if Senator Kaine was in the room. Woefully and pathetically ignorant of the nature of our revolution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Surely Senator Kaine has read the Declaration of Independence. And yet, like most of our political leaders today, he has read it with his mind closed, his eyes shut, and thus uncomprehending of its fundamental meaning. Well, as we approach America's 250th, we face a crisis moment in the history of the Republic. And friends, I do not use that word casually, crisis. Most Americans no longer understand the ideas that gave birth to our revolution. Most Americans could not explain why the American Revolution of 1776 succeeded, while, for example, the French Revolution of 1789 failed. They could not explain how the Americans produced a stable democratic republic while the French produced the guillotine, the reign of terror, a military dictatorship. The English statesman Edmund Burke addressed the events in France in his 1790 work, Reflections on the Revolution in France. It was written while the revolution is still unfolding. Burke warned of political revolutions that despise everything that came before them. Here's the line from Burke. People will not look forward to posterity who never look backward to our ancestors. America's revolutionary leaders were educated, friends. They were educated in the cultural inheritance of Western civilization. The kind of core curriculum that you guys do right here at Grove City, right? They were the most historically aware generation of political leaders in the history of our republic. So let's just spend a few moments together looking back to this history, to this debt to the Western tradition, so that we can look forward with our eyes open. I can put my thesis in 3 words: reason, revelation, and revolution. And Dr. Kanger, I don't think this is my next book, but thanks for suggesting it. Reason, revelation, and revolution. It was the Western understanding of human reason constrained and enlightened by revelation, the revelation contained in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, which made possible the American Revolution in human freedom. Reason, revelation, revolution. Let's start with Aristotle, the Greek philosopher greatly admired by the American founders. They looked to his books on politics and ethics for insight into how to build a just society, the importance of a mixed constitution, separation of powers. But equally important was Aristotle's emphasis on the rule of law, which he described as reason freed from passion. The goal of politics, according to Aristotle, was to create a society that allowed its citizens to live, quote, a blessedly happy life. A blessedly happy life, meaning a life characterized by reason and virtue. As John Adams put it, happiness can never be found without virtue. So virtue, or goodness, well, what was implicit in Greek philosophy was made explicit by Rome's greatest statesman, Marcus Tullius Cicero. As Cicero explained in the Republic, there is such a thing as goodness, a moral law, he said, a moral law of divine origin woven into human nature. Look at how Cicero talks about it here. You've got it on your handout. There will not be one such law in Rome and another in Athens, one now and another in the future, but all peoples at all times will be embraced by a single and eternal and unchangeable law. And there will be, as it were, one Lord and Master of us all, the God who is the author, proposer, and interpreter of that law. That's Cicero in the century before Christ. Well, up until the 20th century, most educated people in the West knew exactly what Cicero was talking about with this moral law thing. We got any hobbits out there? Any hobbits out there? Hobbits? Consider the greatest fantasy novel of the 20th century, Lord of the Rings. The exchange between Aragorn and Eomer as they are coming to grips with the growing threat of Mordor. How is a man to judge what to do in such times, asks Eomer. As he has ever judged, says Aragorn. Good and evil have not changed since yesteryear, nor are they one thing among elves and another thing among men. It is a man's part to discern them, discern the moral law by using our reason, right? So the faculty of reason points to the existence of natural law, a moral law that animates the universe. One of the distinct achievements of the West is to combine this concept of natural law with biblical revelation. This begins to occur really as the early Christian church helps to build a new society on the ruins of the Roman Empire beginning in the 5th century. So how exactly does revelation, as contained in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, how exactly does it transform the classical world, the Greco-Roman world? Because it does. It does so in numerous ways, but none more important than this: by reintroducing into the bloodstream of the West the concept of the God-given worth and dignity of every human soul. Every man and woman bears the image of the Creator. Genesis, chapters 1, 2, and 3. Relative to other societies at the time, think about it. There's what might be called and this may be controversial in this group, a radical individualism expressed in the Bible. Expressed in the Bible. Think about it. The Bible is not only the history of a religious community, it's a history of individuals in community. Individuals. The characters in its pages are emotionally complex, sharply drawn, utterly realistic. And we know their names, friends: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Rahab, Ruth, Moses, Mary, John, Judas, Paul. Much of the vitality of the Bible is found in the flesh and blood personalities who are part of a larger story. The emphasis is on individuals, and that's embedded in the message of Jesus. Think about it. Think about the language Jesus uses when he wants to describe the relentless love of God for the lost. Remember, he tells 3 parables, 3 stories. The story of the woman who loses a precious coin, the shepherd who goes after a solitary lost sheep, the father who embraces his lost son, the prodigal son. The God of the universe sent his only Son to suffer for the sins of the world, to offer the gift of forgiveness and eternal life to every person, according to Christian theology, right? Here, friends, like nowhere else in the ancient world, the individual stands at the center of divine love. Here, in the words of C.S. Lewis, we encounter the weight of glory, the staggering significance of every human life. So these ideas, the use of reason, right? The concept of natural law, okay? The dignity of the individual, they begin to come together, to coalesce, as the church seeks to reform Roman law by applying the teachings of the Bible. So during the Middle Ages, for the first time now in law, individuals, instead of just hierarchies based on class or tribe, individuals become the focus of a developing legal system. That begins to happen in the Middle Ages, making great progress. And yet, despite its many achievements, the Catholic Church will fail to live out the moral and social implications of these ideas. And by the 14th century, we have to say, the church descends into a quagmire of moral and spiritual confusion. And so a reform effort from within the church emerges, the Protestant Reformation. This is one of Martin Luther's achievements now, friends, the reassertion of the dignity of the individual, armed with the scriptures, obedient to his conscience in pursuit of the truth. Let me say that one again. The dignity of the individual, armed with the Bible, obedient to his or her conscience in the pursuit of truth. My conscience is captive to the word of God, Luther says, here I stand. So, this renewed understanding of the individual, rooted in the Bible, is going to underwrite a philosophical breakthrough. Reason and revelation will join hands to produce a revolution to protect natural rights, beginning with the rights of conscience. The rights of conscience. That's the catalyst, friends. The debate over the rights of individual conscience, independent of the authority of church and state. It starts in the 16th century into the 17th century and beyond. So what does the Reformation do? It launches a natural rights revolution that will culminate in the dramatic events of 1776. But it doesn't really start there. It begins in Great Britain. 10 years before the American Revolution, a guy named Charles Pratt, Chief Justice there in Great Britain, he took to the floor of the House of Lords to argue that members of the British Parliament have no right to tax the Americans. Although the government had repealed the Stamp Act in March of 1776, it immediately proposes the Declaratory Act, insisting that the Parliament has full power and authority to pass laws on the colonies, despite the fact we've got no representation. So Pratt sees a backhanded attempt to violate what he calls the fundamental laws of nature and the English Constitution. At the heart of his argument now, as he's on the floor there in Parliament, is the political thought of one of Britain's most celebrated philosophers. Let me read you a few lines. So true are the words of that consummate reasoner and politician, Mr. Locke, he says, and finding what he writes so applicable to the subject in hand, so much in favor of my sentiments, I beg your lordship's leave to read a little of this book. The book he's reading from, friends, is the Second Treatise of Government, published in 1689. The Second Treatise, the political tract that demolishes the case for absolute monarchy, justifies England's glorious revolution, 1690, and helps to set colonial hearts on fire in 1776. Unlike Thomas Hobbes, the Leviathan guy, unlike Hobbes, Locke's state of nature is framed by a moral order originating in the divine will. Take a look at your quote here, friends, from John Locke, the Second Treatise. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind, who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, possessions. For men, being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, all the servants of one sovereign master, sent into the world by his order and about his business, they are his property. There's a mouthful there of theology if you think about it. You know, friends, any Bible scholars out there? Locke's audience would have recognized his allusion to the book of Ephesians, God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. What are you getting with Locke? His breakthrough is unimagined, a breakthrough unimagined even by Christian thinkers as formidable as Thomas Aquinas. He combines reason and revelation to make the case for revolution, a freedom revolution. People have a right to rebel against the political authority, Locke says, when that authority violates their natural rights to life, liberty, and property. And that's how he defines them in the Second Treatise. Natural rights, life, liberty, property. The fundamental purpose of government, Locke's reason, is to protect our natural rights. Government must respect God's relationship with the people he has created. They are his property, right? His workmanship, having been sent out into the world by his order. So get your hands off of God's workmanship, in other words, he's saying to the political authorities. Get your hands off them. Political absolutism, which brings with it the violation of our natural rights, will rob God of his divine prerogative. So what does Locke write in his Second Treatise? Here's a line that might sound familiar. After a long train of abuses, when political rulers make their design visible for all to see, they put themselves into a state of war with the people. And when that happens, Locke warns, it's not to be wondered that they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands that may secure to them the ends for which government was first erected. Well, the American Revolution was a Lockean revolution. It'll be the first in history based on the concept of natural rights, universal human rights that come from the hand of God. You have it there, friends, a few lines from the Declaration. Yes, we hold these truths. Unalienable rights, they say, meaning natural rights, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Jumping down, any form of government becomes destructive of these ends. It's the right of people to alter or abolish, right? Under what circumstances might the people abolish the government? We ask, the revolutionaries ask. And what's the answer, friends? When a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, advances a design to reduce them to absolute despotism. That's when you throw them off. Yes, friends, the language is lifted from Locke's Second Treatise. I am convinced Thomas Jefferson has the Second Treatise right at his elbow as he's writing the Declaration. So the Americans found in the writings of John Locke an argument for a natural rights revolution, an argument that combines reason and revelation more effectively than any other political document in the 18th century. It is hard to overstate Locke's influence on that revolutionary generation. One quotation here from the Boston Gazette, 1773, commenting on Locke's two treatises of government, the Second Treatise especially. The essay alone, the Second Treatise, according to the Boston Gazette, Well studied and attended to will give every intelligent reader a better view of the rights of men and Englishmen. It should be early and carefully explained by every father to his son, by every preceptor in our public and private schools to his pupils, and by every mother to her daughter. Ladies, how's it going out there with the second treatise? Right? I mean, come on, let's get serious here. I know it's on the Grove City College must-read list. So, the American Revolution is usually considered a radical event in political history, and it was radical. But there was something conservative about it, though, as well, friends. Locke's political theology, yes, exerted this profound influence over the American mind because the American mind was shaped decisively by Protestant Christianity. The American mind was a dissenting mind, Protestant dissenting mind, that was even more saturated in biblical language and assumptions than Anglican England. In his book, Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers, the historian Daniel Dreisbach, he says that the King James Bible served as the primary textbook for education, for law, for letters, and civil government during the colonial era. Listen to Dreisbach in his summary of the impact of the Bible. The Bible was the most accessible, authoritative, and venerated text in early colonial society. Indeed, no text provides richer insight into the world of the founders and their experiment in republican self-government and liberty under law. In America, like nowhere else in the Western world, the Bible would be deployed as an agent of democratic resistance. I love that phrase. I just made it up. An agent, I didn't just make it up, an agent of democratic resistance and revolution. The Bible is kind of America's freedom book, if you will. Evangelical ministers cast the struggle against British slavery and tyranny in biblical terms. You got a quote here from James Hudson I want you to look at here, friends, on the back page there. James Hudson, former chief of the Manuscript Division, Library of Congress. I had coffee with James Hudson a number of years ago. Wonderful guy. He knew these manuscripts, hundreds of them, of colonial sermons. The plain fact is that had American clergymen of all denominations not assured their pious countrymen from the beginning of the conflict with Britain that the resistance movement was right in God's sight and had his blessing, it could not have been sustained. Independence could not have been achieved. Here is the fundamental, indispensable contribution of religion and its spokesman to the coming of the American Revolution. Well, but it wasn't only the ministers, right? Biblical phrases and allusions animate the discourse of the colonial patriots in the years leading up to the Revolution. So, it's unsurprising that Thomas Paine, a religious skeptic, probably an atheist, but certainly a skeptic, drew heavily on the Bible to denounce Britain's monarchy in his explosive pamphlet for independence, Common Sense, published in 1776. A few lines from Thomas Paine. As the exalting of one man so greatly above the rest cannot be justified on the equal rights of nature, so neither can it be defended on the authority of Scripture. For the will of the Almighty, as declared by Gideon and the prophet Samuel, expressly disapproves of government by kings. That the Almighty hath entered his protest against monarchical government is true, or the Scripture is false. And Paine doesn't even believe the Scripture. But he knows his audience. He knows his audience. Well, armed with the King James Bible, the colonial Americans advanced radical interpretations of the Scripture to underwrite virtually every facet of their democratic journey. John Adams is typical among the founders in describing the Bible as, quote, the most Republican book in the world, small r, the most Republican book in the world. Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration of Independence, Dr. Benjamin Rush, a surgeon in Washington's Continental Army, a leading abolitionist. He argues that knowledge of the Bible is essential for creating virtuous, self-governing citizens. Listen to Dr. Rush. We have him there on the quote page. We profess to be Republicans, and yet we neglect the only means of establishing and perpetuating our Republican forms of government, that is, the universal education of our youth in the principles of Christianity by means of the Bible. For this divine book, he says, above all others, favors that equality among mankind, that respect for just laws, and all those sober and frugal virtues which constitute the soul of republicanism. Wow. Think about that. Rush and the founders are saying that the Bible teaches the virtues that nourish the soul of republicanism. Wow. Who's saying that today, friends? Who's saying that today? Well, the contrast with the French revolutionaries could not be more extreme. Led by the Jacobins, they were guided by a militantly secular strain of the Enlightenment. Different Enlightenment in America, friends. Scottish Enlightenment, friendly to religion, generally speaking. French Enlightenment, not so much. They made an idol out of reason. Literally made an idol out of reason. The revolutionaries in France dismantled the altar in the nation's most beloved cathedral, Notre Dame, and they replaced it with a statue of the goddess of reason. You can't make this stuff up. The goddess of reason replaces the altar. To the French philosophers, religion was the enemy of reason, the enemy of reason and human rights, and de-Christianization was their policy. What's that sound like today, friends? The French thinker Rousseau, in many ways, the mind behind the French Revolution. Rousseau spoke for many when he denounced Christianity as an ally of oppression. Here's what he said. Its spirit, the Christian spirit, is so favorable to tyranny that it always profits by such a regime. Having rejected the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus, the revolutionaries in France turned toward other deities, liberty, equality, fraternity, and the rights of man. Now, ironically, it was a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville. And I love it when the French get it right, because it happens so infrequently. When I was over here teaching at Grove, quick parenthetical, I pick on the Italians too, don't you worry. When I was teaching at Grove City, teaching Western Civ, we got to the French Revolution, and I said, I love picking on the French. And I paused, and I asked, so why do I love picking on the French? The class is silent. And then I said, because they're French. Yes. No. Anyway, that's enough picking on the French. Sorry about that. Tocqueville. Here's Tocqueville's take on what's on this whole French Revolution thing. And you've got it there. It's the last quote on the page here, friends. Because the French Revolution now seemed to be striving for the regeneration of the human race even more than the reform of France. It lit a passion which the most violent political revolutions had never before been able to produce. Or rather, it itself became a new kind of religion, an incomplete religion, it is true, without God, without ritual, without life after death, but one which nevertheless, like Islam, flooded the earth with its soldiers, apostles, and martyrs. Wow. He nails it. France quickly descends into social chaos, abolishes basic civil liberties, and crowns a dictator for life. The Americans charted a different course, friends. In his farewell address as president, George Washington took a swipe at the French philosophers. He really did in that farewell address. Listen to Washington. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education, reason. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. You can't get Republican virtue without religion, is what he's saying, right? The French revolutionaries believed they had ushered in the dawn of universal bliss. The dawn of universal bliss. How's that working out for you, right? Napoleonic France became the precursor to the modern totalitarian state. It is hard to imagine two revolutions for freedom so different in their core beliefs, in their conduct, and in their results. And John Quincy Adams actually saw this around 1800 in a letter to a Prussian leader. Here's what John Quincy said. It cannot but afford a gratification to every American attached to his country to see its revolution so ably vindicated from the imputation, the accusation of having originated or having been conducted upon the same principles as that of France. John Quincy learned something on that boat ride with his dad. The American Revolution was not the French Revolution. But here's the problem, friends. Modern liberalism has adopted the Jacobin spirit, the French revolutionary spirit. Having dispensed with traditional moral norms, progressives have transformed the severe quality of individual conscience into a playpen of desire. Having denied a religious foundation for human rights, they would leave individuals vulnerable to the despotism of the secular state. Having severed reason from revelation, progressives invite a secular and medical elite to assault and enslave the human person, resulting in what C.S. Lewis called the abolition of man. The impulse to damn with indifference the wisdom of the American founders, friends, it is no longer confined to the French avant-garde or to the political and cultural left. We've got to be honest about this. It is taking root in some ultra-conservative circles in the United States. A small but vocal cadre of Christian conservatives has denounced the American experiment as a fool's errand, a quest for a fully emancipated self, unconstrained by the ties of custom, tradition, family, or faith. That's the message coming from individuals. We need to name them, such as Notre Dame's Patrick Deneen, Rod Dreher. I mean, some of these guys have actually left the country, gone to live in Hungary, hoping for a better revolutionary outcome. How's that working out for you? This ultra-conservative critique of liberal democracy is fueled by a grievous conceptual mistake. It is the failure to grasp the profound differences between the two great revolutions for freedom in the 18th century, between the events of 1776 and 1789. In their feverish denunciations of the ills afflicting modern liberalism, and I can agree with their critique of where modern liberalism has gone, yes, but they've ignored the actual origins of the American Revolution. Well, America's greatest statesmen have always understood the origins of our revolution, from Abraham Lincoln to the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who paid homage to what he called the sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, and those great wells of democracy, King said, dug by the founding fathers. So think about the American Revolution, what it produced. The freest, the most productive, the most creative and dynamic society in the history of the world. The revolution succeeded because at the moment of its birth, think about it, it brought forth the right ideas, the right institutions, and the right kinds of men and women to lead them. What kind of men and women did this revolution produce? Well, there was no campaign of violence to crush dissent. There was no defiling of Christian sanctuaries in a spasm of humanistic rage. There was no guillotine. There was not a Robespierre among them. Their man on horseback was not a Napoleon. He was a Washington. He was a Washington. The man who resigned his military commission to an elected assembly. He resigned it obediently, willingly, for the sake of the Republic. To belittle these achievements is to contribute to the great divorce between religion and Republican self-government. To forget where we came from, to ignore the battle our ancestors fought, the long journey they had to take, is to leave us vulnerable, friends, to the forces of disintegration. But the history of the struggle to build a more just society in the West teaches an inconvenient truth, that there is no coherent view of human personality stripped of the imago Dei, the image of God in us. Britain's chief rabbi, the late Jonathan Sacks, explained that the self-evident truths of the Declaration of Independence needed the anchor of biblical religion. Here's how Rabbi Sacks put it. These self-evident truths. They would have been unintelligible to Plato, to Aristotle, to every hierarchical society the world has ever known, he says. They are self-evident only to people, to Jews and Christians who have internalized the Hebrew Bible. Now, whatever you might think of that proposition, it is certain that the American experiment cannot endure if it rejects its founding principles and ideals. It cannot. It cannot thrive in an utterly, militantly materialistic culture. The sublime doctrine of human dignity emerged from the rugged soil of biblical religion and nowhere else. And if it's going to be renewed, friends, it must draw life from the waters of Sinai and Jerusalem. And that demands attention to our past and the lessons of history. The American war is over, observed Benjamin Rush, meaning the war for independence. But this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of the great drama is closed, he said. Friends, we're all part of this great drama, the American story, the American experiment. But the experiment is in a state of crisis, and the outcome of this crisis is uncertain. So, friends, what part will you play in the contest between tyranny and freedom, between servitude and self-government, between the politics of rage and the spirit of reason and revelation? Because the soul of our republic, and maybe even the soul of our neighbor, may depend on how you answer that question. Thank you for listening. And I think we got some time for Q&A, yeah?
Yep.
The floor is open.
That's right, folks. Just raise your hand. We'll come around, and Dr. Loconte will call on you.
Yeah, right here, sir. Yeah.
Dr. Loconte, I'm sure a number of us saw that movie that just came out, The Great Awakening, and I was really struck by how the preaching of George Whitefield, or broadly, the Great Awakening, actually impacted the American Revolution. I wonder if you saw the movie or just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but I'm aware of the film and I think the themes behind it. And it is absolutely true to say that something happened in America on a large social scale with the Great Awakening, because now you got this attention on individuals having an unmediated relationship with the Creator, right? And that idea of individuals with their scripture before you, able to make decisions, able to respond to God's call, that's a liberating impulse, isn't it? That's a democratization, if you will, of biblical religion. That was a Protestant kind of culture, of course, but it's so central, I think, to understanding why were the Americans kind of so insistent on self-government. And there has to be a connection between that freedom of religion, that ability to, with the scriptures in your hands, to reach out for God on your own without all kinds of authorities to intervene. There's something about that cultural assumption, cultural belief, that so obviously connects to self-government. We govern ourselves, we're not governed by a dictator. So there's a strong, I think, cultural, even spiritual, certainly an ideological, philosophical connection between the two. And it's hard to imagine, although I'm sure there's debate about this historically. Plenty of historians will say, without the Great Awakening, you might not have the American Revolution at the end of the day. I'm not sure how the film comes down on that. But there certainly is an historical argument to make. Without that cultural change and kind of upheaval, and that dissenting understanding, that Protestant dissenting understanding, you're not going to get the revolution. So thank you for that question. That's a piece of it, yeah. Did you want to offer your thoughts, by the way, friend, on that? Your own thoughts about the film?
Well, just that Whitefield was preaching from Maine all the way to Georgia, 30,000 sermons, and it just lit the fire of that spirit.
Yes.
In preparation for the revolution.
Yes. In a culturally really important part of the United States, of course, right? Right up and down that eastern seaboard, right? Absolutely right. And the impact, we should just say, the impact of that on the teachers, the preachers in America, if you just take the Reverend John Witherspoon, for example, at the College of New Jersey, now Princeton. There's Witherspoon, part of this Protestant culture, the only minister to sign the Declaration of Independence. James Madison studies theology under John Witherspoon, an Orthodox Presbyterian minister. Well, what do we make of that? Another discussion for another day, but that's a great point. Great point. Yes, over here.
I'm going to ask you to speculate here a little bit.
I was hoping for a yes-no question, actually. No, it's all good. Go ahead.
Given the division we live with today on the left and the right, we're all aware of how deep that is and how divisive everything seems to be. How do you see that evolving over time and maybe coming together again? Where will it come from? How will that gap be closed, if ever?
Well, it's a question that's I'm out of my depth in trying to answer it. But thinking now historically, are there reasons to be hopeful about some kind of cultural renewal and a greater sort of unity? I think there are. And the reason I say that is because the difficulty that I've suggested here in the beginning of the talk, the sheer ignorance of the principles, the ideals of the founding, that sheer ignorance is something we can address. Of course, you are addressing it at Grove City. So the problem suggests a solution. A partial solution, not a full solution, but a partial solution to the problem is we've got to get this story, this deeply American story, reason, revelation, revolution, and other aspects. We've got to get it back in front of young people. Young people. And that's happening in different places around the country, right? In ways that wasn't quite happening 5 or 10 years ago. It's like the mask has been ripped off higher education in many ways, guys. If you think about those horrible events of October 7th, the massacre of our Jewish friends in Israel by Hamas. What happened on October 8th was as terrifying because on the campuses around this country, we have young people cheering for Hamas. Now that's an education problem, it's a moral and spiritual problem, but we can address it. And what I have found, not only teaching here at Grove, but other places as well, when young people are exposed to these ideas, it stirs something. They're not naturally cynical, but they're awash in lies. So the problem suggests the solution. If we do more of this, do more of what we're talking about, especially for that young generation, you can see real outposts of sanity. And it doesn't take many outposts of sanity to turn a conversation around, I think. That's a stab at it. Great question, thanks. Yeah, right here.
You've lined up so many marvelous quotes from the last 2,000 years. You've talked about Rome, you've talked about the era of Enlightenment, you've talked about so many great thinkers that put together brought us the American Revolution. What will this era be thought to be? Where we are right now, what will future historians think about what we are doing now?
Wow. Wow. So you want a current living historian to project what future historians will think about the present. Can we get a yes/no question out of the group? No, it's a great question. It's a great question. Trying to analyze where we are. Well, look, one way to describe it is, and this is kind of the tough news, is that we are experimenting with this concept that America can sever itself, we can sever the republic from its founding ideals. And we're in a struggle right now, not just our elites, but also ordinary people. Do we want to be children of the French Revolution or children of the American Revolution? Because the ideologies, the philosophies underpinning both revolutions are in play. The radical, militantly secular views of the French Revolution, that's out there, friends, in all kinds of places. But then there's the American side. So I think that's how future historians will look at this is the crisis moment for America. Are they going to look back to a European model for their republic, the French model, the militantly secular model, or are they going to retrieve those ideals and propositions and institutions from the Great Revolution of 1776? We're writing the story. We don't know the outcome. But we are, and I deeply believe we are in that crisis moment right now in a way we've never seen before. That a U.S. senator, who of course came pretty close to being vice president, a bullet away from the presidency, doesn't understand the meaning of the Declaration of Independence. Well, there's trouble in River City, isn't there? Trouble in River City, with a capital T that rhymes with P that stands for pool. You know what I'm talking about? Right. Trouble, man. So I'm hopeful about an outcome because I am not a determinist. The one word that historians like me do not like to use is inevitable. I don't see inevitable decline. I don't see inevitable progress. We have agency. We have choice. That's part of what it means to be made in the image of God. We have choices to make. We can make better choices.
All right, we have time for one more question. Down here in the front.
Thank you for your talk. I found it very inspirational and educational. Thank you for the list of quotes, too. As you were quoting Rabbi Sachs there toward the end, something along the lines of these ideas are self-evident only to those who have a Judeo-Christian perspective, worldview, or training. And it reminds me of something that John Adams said. He said, liberty depends upon the moral and intellectual character of the people, which seems to me today to be an inconvenient thing to believe. what would you say to us in our everyday conversations and interactions is something that we are not saying as well as we could to try to make this inconvenient argument that liberty truly depends upon the moral and intellectual character of the people?
Great question. Thank you for that question. You know, maybe we need to do a little bit more of making it clear to individuals what's the alternative to the American experiment. I gave you those thoughts about the Iranian government because the contrast could not be clearer. This is what you get when you have a state grounded in a completely different value system and has really no concept of natural law, the Islamic Shia. There's no concept of universal human rights. So when you start to play it out, okay, what do societies look like that organize themselves in a militantly secular way? Well, we have North Korea, we have China. I think we got to do a better job of explaining and bringing those examples to the table, and also where that helps us is hearing from some of our immigrant friends who have fled from those countries and can tell us firsthand. What's her name? Yeonmi Park is the North Korean girl. At 13 years old, she escaped from North Korea. Incredible story, winds up in New York City. And she says that when she went to Columbia, she's listening to NPR, she's reading the New York Times, and it's not helping her to unlearn the problems of being a North Korean when you can't think for yourself. And this is what she said, I'm paraphrasing pretty close. She says, what helped me was the old books. I was reading the old books of Western civilization. And then she says, there's a reason that the old books are banned in totalitarian states. And I think those are the kinds of stories we need to bring to the table to our skeptical friends who are in the middle. They're not hardcore left-wing friends we're not maybe going to get to. There's so many people in the middle who are willing to be persuaded, but they've got to hear stories like that. They got to hear those flesh and blood stories. Okay, what's the alternative to the American experiment in ordered freedom? Let's take a look at those happy experiments, can we? Et cetera, et cetera. That will help us, I think, in a huge way. And again, back to where young people are. They are not naturally cynical, but they're awash in lies. And think about the level of discouragement and grief and disorientation. I think part of the reason so many young people are struggling is we haven't helped them to see that they are part of this larger story, this incredible American Western story. If we do that, there are great reasons to be hopeful. Thank you guys for listening. Great being with you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Loconte. Fantastic talk. Folks, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. We'll come back here at 9:50.